Danisha Williams stepped off the plane at Middle Georgia Regional Airport, her boots hitting the tarmac with a thud that echoed the weight in her chest. 10 months in Afghanistan, 10 months of heat, dust, and the relentless rhythm of military life had left her weary but unbroken. She was a staff sergeant, a black woman who'd climbed the ranks through grit and quiet resolve, and all she'd thought about during those long nights under desert stars was coming home to Macon, Georgia. The thought of her family's ranch, nestled along the lazy curve of the Ocmulgee River, had kept her grounded. It wasn't just a house. It was a legacy, 3 generations of Williams women who'd poured their souls into that land. Her great-grandmother, Miss Etta, used to sit on the porch, weaving stories of resilience, of how she'd faced down Jim Crow to keep that plot of earth. Danisha could still hear her voice low and steady saying, "This land is our story, child. Ain't nobody can take that from us." Now, as she slung her duffel bag over her shoulder, the humid Georgia air wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She was home. Or so she thought. The drive from the airport was a blur of memory. She rented a pickup truck, a silver Ford, that reminded her of her father's old rig, and headed west toward the outskirts of Macon. The road stretched out, lined with pines and the occasional billboard, and her heart lifted as she pictured the ranch, the wraparound porch where she'd spent summer evenings, the pecan tree her cousins used to dare her to climb the barn that still held the faint scent of her grandfather's tobacco. She'd paid every bill before deploying mortgage taxes, even the HOA fees for the Riverbend Estates, where her family's property sat among newer cookie-cutter homes. Danisha had been meticulous, double-checking every payment, knowing the Homeowners Association led by Evelyn Harper was notorious for its nitpicking. Evelyn, with her starched blouses and clipped tone, had once fined Danisha's aunt for planting roses too close to the property line. But Danisha had left nothing to chance. Her home was secure, or so she'd believed. As she turned onto Riverbend Drive, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. The neighborhood looked the same: manicured lawns, white fences, the kind of place that screamed suburban order. But when she pulled into her driveway, her breath caught. A blue minivan sat where her truck belonged. 2 children's bikes leaned against the fence, one with pink streamers fluttering in the breeze. Through the front window of her ranch house, the house she'd grown up in, the house Miss Etta had fought to keep, she saw curtains she didn't recognize, pale yellow instead of her mother's blue gingham. Toys littered the living room floor. Danisha's first thought was that she'd made a mistake, taken a wrong turn. But the pecan tree stood tall in the yard, its branches just as she remembered. The mailbox still had the faint dent from when she'd backed into it learning to drive. This was her home. Her heart pounded as she killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman appeared, mid-30s, blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, a toddler perched on her hip. She froze when she saw Danisha still in her camouflage uniform, duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice tight, her eyes darting over Danisha's uniform as if it were a costume. Danisha straightened, her training kicking in despite the surreal moment. "This is my house," she said, her tone steady but firm. "Who are you?" The woman's grip on the toddler tightened, and her lips parted in surprise. "I think you're mistaken," she said, stepping back slightly. "We bought this place 6 months ago. From the HOA." The words hit Danisha like a shockwave. The HOA, Evelyn Harper. Her stomach twisted. "Bought it?" She repeated, her voice low, dangerous. "My name is Danisha Williams. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. I didn't sell it, and I sure as hell didn't give anyone permission to." The woman shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flickering with unease. "Look, we have the paperwork," she said, her tone defensive now. "We paid for it fair and square. If you've got a problem, you need to take it up with the HOA. That's all I can tell you." Dinesha's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She'd faced insurgents in Kandahar, stared down danger in places most people couldn't imagine. But nothing had prepared her for this, the quiet theft of her home, her history while she was halfway across the world serving her country. "I'm not mistaken," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "I paid every bill before I left. Every mortgage payment, every tax, every fee. This is my home." The woman's face softened for a moment, but then her toddler began to fuss, and she stepped back toward the door. "I'm sorry," she said, "but this is our home now. You need to leave." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Dinesha standing in the driveway, the Georgia heat pressing against her skin. She returned to her truck, her mind racing. The HOA, Evelyn Harper. Dinesha remembered the woman's cold smile, the way she'd walked the neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom, clipboard in hand, issuing fines for overgrown grass or unpainted fences. Miss Etta used to call her the Queen of Petty, always muttering about how Evelyn seemed to have it out for the older families, the ones who'd been there before Riverbend Estates became a desirable address. Dinesha had brushed it off as small-town politics, but now it felt like something darker. She'd paid those dues. She'd made sure of it. Yet, here she was, locked out of her own home, watching a stranger's life unfold behind her windows. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, the weight of betrayal sinking in. This wasn't just about her. It was about Miss Etta's stories, her father's calloused hands fixing the barn roof, her mother's laughter echoing through the kitchen. It was about everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for. Dinesha drove to a gas station on the edge of town, the neon sign flickering against the dusk. She sat in the truck, staring at the dashboard, trying to piece together what had happened. The HOA couldn't just sell her house. She'd been deployed, protected by federal laws, like the Service Members' Civil Relief Act. She'd done everything right. But Evelyn Harper had always had a way of bending rules to suit her. Dinesha remembered the time Evelyn had cited her for parking her truck improperly during a weekend visit, a $200 fine for something that wasn't even in the bylaws. Her aunt had warned her, "That woman's got no soul, Dinesha. She'll smile while she cuts you." Now it seemed Evelyn had gone far beyond fines. She'd taken everything. Reaching for her phone, Dinesha dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Jamal Carter, a sheriff's deputy, and her childhood friend picked up on the second ring. "Dinesha, you back?" His voice was warm, surprised, but she cut straight to it. "Jamal, the HOA sold my ranch. There's a family living in it right now. They said they bought it from Evelyn Harper." The line went quiet for a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jamal's voice hardened. "Sold your ranch, how you were deployed." Dinesha exhaled, her breath shaky. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. I paid everything, Jamal. Everything. But they're saying I didn't, and now my home's gone." Jamal cursed under his breath. "This ain't right. You need to come by the station. Bring any paperwork you've got. Receipts. Bank statements. Anything. I've heard whispers about Harper's HOA pulling shady stuff before, but this is next level. Don't go back to the house yet. Okay? You don't want trouble on your first day home." Dinesha managed a bitter laugh. "Trouble? I just want my house back." Jamal's voice softened. "I know. But trust me, this sounds bigger than just you. If Evelyn did this, she's probably done it to others. Sit tight. We'll figure it out." She hung up, leaning back in the driver's seat, the gas station's fluorescent glow casting shadows across her face. Her uniform felt heavy now, the weight of her service clashing with the reality of what she'd come home to. She'd fought for her country, put her life on the line, only to find her sanctuary stolen. The injustice burned, but beneath it was something colder, sharper determination. They'd taken her home, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Danisha Williams wasn't just a soldier. She was Miss Etta's great-granddaughter raised on stories of defiance and survival. She wasn't going to let this go. As she sat there, the memory of Miss Etta's voice came back clear, as the river that ran by their land. "Ain't nobody can take your story, child. You hold it tight, and you fight for it." Danisha's jaw tightened. She'd fought in war zones. She could fight this. But what she didn't yet know was that Evelyn Harper wasn't just a petty bureaucrat with a vendetta. The HOA was a machine oiled by greed and connections that reached further than Danisha could imagine. As she started the truck and pulled back onto the road, the lights of Macon fading behind her, she felt the first stirrings of a battle she hadn't signed up for. This wasn't just about her ranch. It was about every family Evelyn had crushed, every legacy she'd erased. And Danisha was going to tear it all down. The morning after Danisha Williams discovered strangers living in her family's ranch, she woke in a motel room off Interstate 16, the hum of the air conditioner barely drowning out the storm in her mind. Sleep had been fleeting, her dreams tangled with images of Miss Etta's porch swing swaying empty in the wind and the stranger's yellow curtains hanging in her childhood home. She pulled on her uniform, the camouflage fabric a reminder of her resilience, and headed to the Riverbend Estates HOA office in downtown Macon. The building was a low beige structure, wedged between a nail salon and a pawn shop, its sign polished to a gleam that screamed false respectability. Danisha's boots echoed on the pavement as she approached her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, stuffed with every receipt and bank statement she'd kept before deploying. She wasn't here to plead. She was here to confront Evelyn Harper, the woman who'd orchestrated the theft of her home. Inside the office smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. A receptionist, a young woman with a tight ponytail, glanced up from her phone, her eyes widening at Danisha's uniform. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone more cautious than welcoming. Danisha set her duffel on the counter, her voice steady but edged with steel. "I need to see Evelyn Harper. Now. Tell her Staff Sergeant Danisha Williams is here about the ranch she sold out from under me." The receptionist's fingers froze over her keyboard, and she scurried down a hallway without a word. Danisha stood arms crossed, her pulse steady despite the fire in her chest. She'd faced worse than bureaucrats in Afghanistan, insurgents, sandstorms, the constant weight of responsibility for her unit. But this felt personal, a betrayal that cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Evelyn Harper emerged moments later, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her navy blazer crisp, as if pressed that morning. At 58, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd ruled Riverbend Estates for decades. Her glasses perched low on her nose, her smile thin and practiced. "Sergeant Williams," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "I heard you were back. What seems to be the problem?" Danisha stepped closer, her height matching Evelyn's, her gaze unflinching. "The problem is, you sold my ranch, my family's home. I paid every bill before I left, mortgage taxes, your HOA fees. So you tell me how a family's living in my house, claiming they bought it from you." Evelyn's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with something, calculation maybe, or defiance. "You're mistaken," she said, folding her arms. "Our records show you failed to pay dues for over a year. You abandoned the property, Sergeant." The board had no choice but to act. Danisha's jaw tightened. "Abandoned, I was deployed serving my country." Federal law protects soldiers like me from this exact kind of stunt. And I've got receipts proving I paid everything." She unzipped her duffel, pulling out a folder stuffed with documents, and slapped it on the counter. The receptionist flinched, but Evelyn didn't blink. "Your records are wrong," Danesha said, her voice low and sharp. "Or you made them wrong." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thinner line, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. "I suggest you lower your voice," she said. "The HOA followed protocol. If you have an issue, take it up with your lawyers. Harassing me won't change the fact that the property was legally sold." Danesha leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "If your records don't match mine, Evelyn, someone's lying. And it's not me." She turned and walked out the door, slamming behind her, leaving the receptionist staring, and Evelyn's face unreadable. Outside, the Georgia sun beat down, but Danesha barely felt it. Her mind churned. Evelyn's confidence wasn't just arrogance, it was too polished, too rehearsed. She'd done this before. Danesha drove to the Bibb County Sheriff's Office where Jamal Carter was waiting. Jamal, a broad-shouldered deputy with a quick smile, had grown up 3 streets over from the Williams Ranch. He'd been the one to teach Danesha how to fish in the Ocmulgee back when they were kids, dreaming of bigger things. Now he leaned back in his chair, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights as Danesha recounted her confrontation. "She's stonewalling," Danesha said, spreading her receipts across his desk. "Claims I didn't pay, but look at this, every payment time-stamped cleared before I left." Jamal scanned the documents, his brow furrowing. "This don't add up," he said. "I checked the county records this morning. There's a transfer on your property signed by the HOA board claiming unpaid dues and violations, but your signature's nowhere on it. They pushed it through as a lien foreclosure." Danesha's fists clenched. "A lien? For what I paid everything." Jamal shook his head, his voice low. "It's fishy, Danesha. I've heard grumblings about Harper's HOA before, folks saying they got hit with random fees, violations out of nowhere. But selling a deployed soldier's house, that's bold even for her." He leaned forward, his eyes serious. "You need to go through legal channels. The Army's JAG office can help service members' Civil Relief Act covers you. But be careful. Evelyn's got connections. County clerks, developers, even some folks in City Hall. She's not just a neighborhood tyrant. She's got pull." Danesha nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let her have pull. I've got proof." That afternoon, Danesha met with Captain Aisha Brooks at the Judge Advocate General's office in Fort Gordon, a 2-hour drive from Macon. Captain Brooks, a sharp-eyed lawyer with a reputation for dismantling shady deals, listened as Danesha laid out her case. "You've got a strong position," Brooks said, flipping through the receipts. "The SCRA protects deployed service members from foreclosure without court approval. If the HOA pushed this through without notifying you, they're in violation. But we need their records to prove they fabricated the debt." Danesha's eyes narrowed. "Evelyn's already claiming her records show I didn't pay. How do we get the truth?" Brooks smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "We file for discovery. Force them to hand over their books. If they're falsifying records, we'll find it." As Danesha left Fort Gordon, a chance encounter shifted the tide. At a diner near the base, she ran into Marla Tate, a former HOA office assistant who'd quit 6 months earlier. Marla, a wiry woman in her 40s with nervous hands, recognized Danesha from neighborhood meetings years ago. Over coffee, Marla's voice dropped to a whisper. "I heard what happened," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "It's not just you. Evelyn's been doing this for years, targeting folks who can't fight back. Deployed soldiers, elderly couples, families struggling with bills. She'd pile on fake fees, claim violations that didn't exist, then push for foreclosure." Danesha's pulse quickened. "Why didn't you say anything?" Marla's eyes dropped to her cup. I tried once, told a board member I thought it was wrong. Next day my car tires were slashed, and Evelyn suggested I'd be happier elsewhere. I was scared, Danisha, but you're a soldier. If anyone can stop her, it's you. Marla's words hit hard, not just for their truth, but for the shame in her voice. Danisha leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. Marla, if you know something, you need to come forward. I can't do this alone. Marla hesitated, then slid a folded piece of paper across the table. This is my number. I've got copies of some emails, Evelyn's instructions to the board about problem properties. Your ranch was one of them. I'll help, but I need to know I'm safe. Danisha pocketed the paper, her mind racing. This was the break she needed, a crack in Evelyn's armor. But Marla's fear was real, and it meant Evelyn wasn't just playing dirty. She was dangerous. That evening, Danisha sat in her motel room, the folder of receipts spread across the bed. She called her cousin Tasha, who lived in Savannah. Tasha's voice crackled with fury when she heard the news. They sold Miss Etta's house. Over my dead body, Danisha. You need me there, Danisha smiled despite herself. Not yet, Tasha. But I'm going to need you to keep me grounded. This ain't just about me anymore. Marla says there's others folks who lost their homes the same way. Tasha's voice softened. You sound like Miss Etta. You know that. She'd be proud, but she'd also tell you to watch your back. People like Evelyn don't go down easy. Danisha nodded, staring at the neon glow outside her window. Tasha was right. Evelyn's confidence in the HOA office hadn't been shaken even when confronted with proof. That meant she had a plan, and Danisha needed to be ready for it. Back in Macon, Evelyn Harper sat in her pristine living room, a glass of bourbon in her hand. Her phone buzzed with a text from a board member. Curtis Reed Williams was at the office today. She's got receipts. This could get messy. Evelyn's lips curled into a sneer. Messy or not, she'd built Riverbend Estates into what it was: exclusive, orderly, profitable. The Williams Ranch, with its sprawling acres and old money charm, had been a thorn in her side for years, a reminder of the families who didn't fit her vision of the neighborhood. Selling it had been easy, too easy perhaps, but Danisha's return was a complication she hadn't anticipated. Evelyn dialed her attorney, Mark Langston, her voice icy. She's stirring trouble, Evelyn said. We need to make sure her story doesn't spread. Find out who she's talking to. And if she pushes, we push back harder. Langston hesitated. Evelyn, she's a soldier. The Army's involved. This isn't like the others. Evelyn's grip tightened on the glass. Then we make her look like the problem, not us. As Danisha lay in her motel bed that night, the weight of the fight settled over her. She thought of Miss Etta, who'd faced down sheriffs and bankers to keep the ranch in the family. She thought of Marla, trembling as she handed over that scrap of paper. And she thought of the family in her home, unaware they'd been sold a lie. Evelyn Harper had underestimated her, thinking a deployed soldier wouldn't come back swinging. But Danisha was Miss Etta's kin, forged in the same fire. She closed her eyes, her resolve sharpening. This wasn't just about getting her ranch back. It was about exposing a system that preyed on the vulnerable, about tearing down a kingdom built on stolen dreams. And as she drifted toward sleep, she knew Evelyn was plotting too. The battle was just beginning, and it was going to get ugly. Danisha Williams sat in the back room of a Macon community center, the air thick with the scent of old wood and brewing coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a stark glow over the folding chairs, where a dozen people sat, their faces a mix of exhaustion and defiance. These were the other victims of Evelyn Harper's HOA families, who'd lost homes to fabricated fees and foreclosures, just like Danisha. There was the elderly couple, the Thompsons, who'd lived in Riverbend Estates for 30 years, before being pushed out over landscaping violations. There was the Martinez family immigrants from Honduras who'd scraped together everything to buy their first home only to lose it to a lien they couldn't pay. And there was Jamal Carter, her childhood friend and sheriff's deputy, leaning against the wall, his badge glinting as he listened. Danisha had called this meeting fueled by Marla Tate's revelations and the growing pile of evidence from the HOA's own records. She stood at the front, her uniform swapped for jeans and a plain black shirt, but her posture still carried the weight of a soldier. "We're not alone in this," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. "Evelyn Harper and her board have been stealing homes targeting folks who couldn't fight back. But we're here now together, and we're going to stop her." The room stirred nods and whispered agreements rippling through the group. Mrs. Thompson, her hands trembling with age, raised her voice first. "They said our azaleas were non-compliant, charged us thousands in fines we couldn't pay. Next thing we knew, our house was gone sold to some developer from Atlanta." Her husband, Mr. Thompson, gripped her hand, his eyes wet. "We raised our kids there. Now we're in a one-bedroom apartment, barely getting by." Danisha's chest tightened. She saw her own pain reflected in their faces, the same betrayal she'd felt standing in her driveway, watching a stranger's life unfold in her home. Carlos Martinez spoke next, his accent thick, but his anger clear. "They told us we owed for repairs we never asked for. When we tried to fight it, they sent lawyers. We didn't stand a chance." Danisha nodded, her resolve hardening. "You do now. The Army's JAG office is involved, and we've got evidence, emails, fake fees, proof they targeted us on purpose. But we need your stories, your records, anything you've got. The more we have, the stronger our case." As the meeting stretched on, stories poured out, each one a variation of the same scheme. Sudden fines, inflated penalties, foreclosures pushed through with no warning. Danisha felt the weight of their trust settling on her shoulders. She hadn't asked to lead this fight, but she couldn't walk away. Not when she saw the hope flickering in their eyes, the belief that someone was finally listening. Jamal caught her afterward, his voice low. "You're giving them something they haven't had in years, Danisha." A voice. "But you need to know Evelyn's not sitting idle. I heard she's been meeting with her board, probably circling the wagons." Danisha's jaw clenched. "Let her! We've got the truth on our side." Jamal hesitated, then added, "Just watch yourself. Folks like her don't play fair when they're cornered." The warning proved prophetic. By the next morning, whispers had begun to spread. Danisha woke to her phone buzzing with notifications, anonymous posts on local forums, comments on social media, all painting her as unstable a soldier unhinged by her time overseas. PTSD makes her erratic. One post read, "She's harassing honest homeowners," said another. The words stung not just for their lies, but for the way they twisted her service into a weapon. She'd seen combat, yes, but she'd come home whole, her mind sharp, her purpose clear. This wasn't trauma, it was rage, righteous and focused. But the smear campaign was clever, designed to make her doubt herself, to make others doubt her. When she stopped for coffee at a Macon diner, the barista, a young man who'd always been friendly, avoided her eyes. "Heard you're stirring trouble," he mumbled, sliding her cup across the counter. Danisha forced a smile, paid, and left, but the encounter left a bitter taste. That afternoon, the trouble escalated. Danisha returned to her motel to find her truck's windshield cracked, a spiderweb of fractures radiating from a single point, as if someone had taken a hammer to it. No note, no witnesses, just the quiet menace of the act. She stood there, her hands shaking with fury, knowing this was no accident. Evelyn was sending a message. Danesha called Jamal, who arrived within the hour, his cruiser parked beside her truck. "This is her style," he said, inspecting the damage. "Nothing direct. Nothing traceable. Just enough to rattle you." Danesha crossed her arms, her voice low. "She thinks this'll scare me off. She doesn't know me." Jamal met her eyes, his expression grim. "I know you, Danesha. But people like Evelyn don't stop at broken glass. You're a threat now, and she's got friends, developers, county officials, folks who've been profiting off these sales. You need to be smart." Smart meant moving forward, not back. Danesha met with Captain Aisha Brooks at Fort Gordon, again this time with a stack of new evidence, Marla Tate's emails which detailed Evelyn's instructions to prioritize certain properties, including Danesha's ranch. One email sent to the board was chillingly blunt. Focus on owners who won't push back deployed elderly or struggling. They're less likely to fight. Danesha's stomach turned as she read it, the words confirming what she'd suspected. This wasn't random. It was a system cold and calculated designed to prey on the vulnerable. Captain Brooks leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "This is dynamite," she said. "We're filing for discovery next week, and with this we'll tear their operation apart. But we need more witnesses. If Marla testifies, and if others from your meeting come forward, we can show a pattern. That's what'll bury them." The next evening, Danesha was back at the community center, this time with a smaller group: Mrs. Thompson, Carlos Martinez, and a new face, Patrice Ellis, a single mother who had lost her home to the HOA 2 years earlier. Patrice's hands shook as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said I owed $8,000 in fees. I was working 2 jobs, raising my kids alone. I couldn't keep up. They sold my house to a couple from out of state, and now my kids sleep in a rented room." Her eyes glistened, and Danesha reached out, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "We're fighting this together." But Patrice hesitated, her voice breaking. "I'm scared, Danesha. Evelyn's got people everywhere. My neighbor said his car got towed after he complained at a meeting. What if they come after me?" Danesha's heart ached, but she kept her voice firm. "I'm scared too, Patrice, but think about your kids. Think about what they took from you. If we stand together, they can't touch us all." As the meeting ended, a young girl slipped into the room, no older than 10, her braids adorned with bright beads. She approached Danesha shyly, clutching a folded piece of paper. "Miss Williams," she said, her voice small, "I live in your house. My mom didn't know it was yours. She told me to give you this." Danesha unfolded the note, her breath catching. It was a handwritten apology from the woman she'd met in her driveway, admitting they'd been misled by the HOA, that they'd thought the sale was legitimate. "We're sorry," the note read. "We don't want to be part of this." Danesha looked at the girl, her anger softening. "Tell your mom I don't blame her," she said. "This is on Evelyn Harper, not you." The girl nodded and ran off, leaving Danesha with a strange mix of hope and pain. The family in her home wasn't the enemy, they were victims too, caught in Evelyn's web. Across town, Evelyn Harper sat in her dining room, a chandelier casting soft light over a table strewn with HOA ledgers. Her board members, Curtis Reed and Sandra Wells, sat across from her, their faces tense. Curtis, a nervous man in his 50s, was sweating, despite the air conditioning. "This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice cracking. "Williams is rallying people. I heard she's got Marla Tate talking. If Marla hands over those emails, we're done." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting like glass. "Marla's a coward. She won't testify. And as for Williams, she's a soldier, not a lawyer. She'll burn out." Sandra, a realtor with ties to local developers, shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn, the army's involved. And the sheriff's sniffing around. If they dig into the books, they'll see the fees we added the sales to your developer friends. We need a plan. Evelyn leaned back, her fingers tapping the table. The plan is simple. We discredit her. Make her look unstable, like she's lashing out because of the war. And we remind everyone on this board that we're in this together. You signed the same papers I did. Later that night, Danesha stood outside her motel, staring at her damaged truck. The cracked windshield gleamed under the streetlights, a silent threat. She thought of Miss Etta, who'd once stood up to a bank trying to foreclose on the ranch during the Great Depression, her shotgun in hand, daring them to step on her land. Danesha didn't have a shotgun, but she had something stronger, proof allies, and a fire that Evelyn couldn't extinguish. She called Captain Brooks, her voice steady. "They're coming after me, Aisha. Smears, vandalism, whatever's next. But I'm not backing down." Brooks's response was calm but fierce. "Good, because we just got a tip. Someone leaked internal HOA memos, and they tie Evelyn to a developer who's been flipping these homes for profit. This isn't just about your ranch anymore, Danesha. It's about a whole network." Danesha hung up, her heart pounding. The fight was growing, and so was the danger. But as she looked out at the Mekong skyline, the Okmulgee River glinting in the distance, she felt Miss Etta's strength in her bones. Evelyn Harper had picked the wrong woman to mess with. The federal courthouse in Atlanta loomed like a fortress, its granite facade reflecting the morning sun as Danesha Williams stepped onto its steps. The air buzzed with anticipation. News vans lined the street, reporters jostled for position, and a crowd of supporters, including veterans waving small American flags, chanted her name. It had been weeks since the community meeting in Macon, weeks since her truck's windshield was shattered, weeks since Marla Tate's leaked emails cracked open Evelyn Harper's carefully guarded empire. Now the case against the Riverbend Estates HOA was in its final stage, a federal hearing that had drawn attention far beyond Georgia. Danesha, in a crisp blazer over her civilian clothes, carried a folder of evidence under her arm, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. Beside her stood Captain Aisha Brooks, her JAG lawyer, whose calm demeanor hid a fierce determination. "This is it," Brooks said, her voice low. "Today we show the world what Evelyn's been hiding." Danesha nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. She wasn't just fighting for her ranch anymore. She was fighting for the Thompsons, the Martinezes, Patrice Ellis, and every family Evelyn had crushed. This was about justice, and she was ready. Inside the courtroom was packed, the wooden benches creaking under the weight of neighbors, displaced homeowners, and reporters scribbling furiously. Evelyn Harper sat across the aisle, her silver hair immaculate, her face a mask of icy control. Her attorneys, led by Mark Langston, whispered among themselves, their briefcases stuffed with documents meant to defend the indefensible. Danesha's gaze lingered on Evelyn for a moment, not with anger but with clarity. This woman had built a kingdom on stolen homes, profiting off the vulnerable while hiding behind bylaws and forged ledgers. But today, that kingdom would face judgment. The judge, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair, entered, and the room rose in silence before settling. Captain Brooks stood, her voice clear and commanding. "Your Honor, this case is about systemic fraud, orchestrated by Evelyn Harper and the Riverbend Estates HOA. They targeted Staff Sergeant Danesha Williams, a deployed soldier, and other families, fabricating debts to seize their homes. We will prove not only fraud, but a deliberate conspiracy to profit from illegal foreclosures. Brooks presented the evidence with surgical precision. Marla Tate's emails detailing Evelyn's orders to target vulnerable homeowners. Bank records showing inflated fees added to paid accounts. And testimony from Curtis Reed, the board member who'd flipped under pressure, admitting his role in signing off on fraudulent liens. The Thompsons took the stand first, their voices trembling as they described losing their home of 30 years over fines for non-existent violations. Carlos Martinez followed, his hands steady, but his eyes burning as he recounted how the HOA's lawyers overwhelmed his family, forcing them into a cramped rental. Patrice Ellis spoke last, her voice breaking, as she described her children, asking if they'd ever have a yard again. Each story built on the last painting a picture of a predatory system that preyed on those least equipped to fight back. Danisha listened, her chest tight, her hands folded to keep them from shaking. These weren't just stories, they were lives torn apart by greed. When Evelyn's attorney, Mark Langston, rose, his voice was smooth, almost patronizing. "Your Honor, the HOA followed legal protocols. These homeowners, including Ms. Williams, failed to meet their obligations. Our records show unpaid dues and violations, all documented and acted upon within our rights." He gestured to a stack of papers, pristine and orderly, as if they held the truth. But under cross-examination, the cracks began to show. Captain Brooks held up one of Marla's emails, projected on a screen for the courtroom to see. "Ms. Harper Brooks," said, her tone sharp, "this email sent by you instructs your board to prioritize properties owned by those less likely to contest. Can you explain why Staff Sergeant Williams's ranch was listed as a target?" Evelyn's composure faltered, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't recall that specific instruction," she said, her voice tight. "Our actions were based on policy." Brooks didn't let up. Policy to target a deployed soldier, or the elderly, or families like the Martinezes, who you knew couldn't afford legal representation. The courtroom murmured, the judge's gavel striking to restore order. Danisha took the stand next, her voice steady as she swore in. She faced the judge, her words carrying the weight of her service and her pain. "I was in Afghanistan serving my country when the HOA sold my family's ranch. I paid every bill before I left, mortgage, taxes, dues. I have the receipts. But they claimed I abandoned my home, my great-grandmother's legacy. I came back to find strangers living in the house where I grew up, where Miss Etta fought to keep our land through segregation, and worse. They didn't just take my property, they took my history." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Even the reporters paused, their pens still. During cross-examination, Langston tried to rattle her. "It's Williams. Isn't it possible you missed a payment under the stress of deployment?" Danisha's eyes locked on his. "I don't miss my responsibilities, Mr. Langston, not to my country and not to my family." The turning point came when Marla Tate testified. Her hands shook as she took the stand, but her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Evelyn told us to target certain homes," she said. "She called them easy marks, soldiers away from home, older folks, families struggling. She said it was about keeping the neighborhood desirable. But it was about money. The homes were sold to developers she knew for cheap, then flipped for profit." The courtroom erupted in gasps, and Evelyn's face went pale, her hands gripping the table. Langston objected, claiming Marla was unreliable, but the judge overruled her expression, hardening. The evidence was undeniable: emails, memos, bank transfers, linking Evelyn to a network of developers who'd reaped millions from the stolen properties. As the hearing closed, the judge announced a temporary injunction freezing all HOA actions pending a full investigation. Outside, the crowd roared as Danesha emerged, reporters swarming her. "Staff Sergeant Williams, do you believe you'll get your ranch back?" one shouted. Danesha paused, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This isn't just about my ranch. It's about every family who's been told they don't matter. We're fighting for all of them, and we won't stop." The cameras flashed, veterans saluted, and the Martinezes hugged her, tears streaming down their faces. But Danesha's eyes caught Evelyn slipping into a black sedan, her sunglasses hiding her expression. She wasn't defeated yet, and Danesha knew it. In the weeks that followed, the case exploded. Federal investigators from the Department of Justice descended on Macon, armed with subpoenas and questions about not just the HOA, but the county officials who'd rubber-stamped the sales. Curtis Reed, under protection, provided more documents revealing a web of kickbacks between Evelyn and a developer named Richard Vance. The story hit national news, sparking debates about HOA abuse and systemic inequities. Danesha returned to the ranch one evening, standing at the edge of the property, the pecan tree casting long shadows. The family living there had moved out, their belongings packed after learning the sale was fraudulent. Danesha didn't blame them. They'd been lied to just like her. She walked the land, her boots sinking into the Georgia soil, and thought of Miss Etta. "This land is our story," she'd said, and Danesha was rewriting it. She organized a community gathering at the ranch, inviting the families who'd fought beside her. The Thompsons brought homemade peach cobbler, the Martinezes shared stories of their children's dreams, and Patrice Ellis smiled. For the first time, Danesha had seen her kids running through the grass. Jamal was there too, his deputy's hat off for once, grinning as he handed her a beer. "You did this, Danesha," he said. "You gave them hope." She shook her head, her eyes on the river glinting in the dusk. "We did it. All of us." But the fight wasn't over. Evelyn faced federal charges, fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, but her network of allies was still out there, and Danesha knew they'd try to rebuild. She'd be ready. Inspired by Miss Etta's legacy, Danesha founded a legal fund for service members and families facing HOA abuse, vowing to ensure no one else came home to a stolen life. As she stood on her porch, the swing creaking softly, she felt a peace she hadn't known since stepping off that plane. This wasn't just about reclaiming her ranch, it was about reclaiming dignity for herself and for every family who'd been silenced. The fireflies sparked in the distance, and Danesha whispered Miss Etta's words, "Ain't nobody can take your story." She'd fought for hers, and she'd keep fighting for others because no one was too small to matter.